Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we'll travel back in time to the 5th Academy Awards, which awarded the films of 1931 and 1932. Frank Borzage arrived with an adaptation of the book and play titled Bad Girl, starring James Dunn and Sally Eilers. The film went on to earn 3 Oscar nominations, winning for both directing and for the screenplay, but it would lose Best Picture to a film with no other nominations, Grand Hotel. So why did Bad Girl come up short? We'll explore all this and more as we discuss how the Oscar almost went to Bad Girl. Hello and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, and here we are in yet another Oscar year that is celebrating the films of 2 different years, which will continue through the rest of this show in terms of the early years of the Oscars that did 2 years in one ceremony. So we're talking 1931 and 1932. And not the entirety of those years, but like specifically half of those years. So I'm very happy to have on one of my favorite guests that I have on pretty frequently at this point. You've heard him talking There Will Be Blood in the films of 2007, Reds in the films of 1981, The Last Picture Show in the films of 1971, and The Treasure of the Sierra Madre in the films of 1948. Plus some episodes of On Second Thought about Lincoln, Babel, and Mississippi Burning. And, not to be outdone, a For My Consideration episode on shortcuts. Please welcome back my colleague and friend from Gold Derby, Zach Laws.
Thank you for having me again. I hope that fans of your podcast enjoy the sound of my voice at this point.
Yes.
If they don't, I really feel bad for them anytime I pop up.
They love you. It's okay. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And I appreciate you, not to go too inside baseball, but you kind of are filling in for a guest I was going to have, so I appreciate you coming in at the last minute and agreeing to do this. So thank you very much.
I'm always happy to be a pitch hitter for you. So
Yes. Old reliable.
That's what they call me. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, well, today we are talking about a movie called Bad Girl. And that, we are saying, is the runner-up to the Best Picture winner Grand Hotel, which is a film that did not win any other Oscars and wasn't even nominated for them. So this is going to be a fun discussion getting into that. So Bad Girl is a drama based on the 1928 novel and 1930 play of the same name, and it tells the story of a working-class woman named Dorothy who very quickly rushes into a relationship with a fellow working-class man named Eddie Collins, and they decide to get married so she can get out of her abusive brother's apartment, and eventually they end up having some marital strife after really just failing to communicate what they want and need from each other, which leads to some unintended consequences. So the film was directed by Frank Borzage and written by Edwin J. Burke. It stars Sally Eilers as Dorothy and James Dunn as Eddie, plus Minna Gombel as Dorothy's best friend Edna, and a whole bunch of uncredited performers in other roles. So Bad Girl was nominated for 3 Academy Awards, winning 2, but the one it did not win was Best Picture. So Zach, let's get into it. Let's talk Bad Girl. What are your thoughts on this movie with an inaccurate title?
Yeah, I was going to say, first of all, it's probably the most misleading title in the history of cinema, because the bad girl of the title is portrayed as being so saintly and so virginal as to make you wonder why they even stuck with that title at all. We should say that the novel that this was based on by Vina Delmar was much more salacious at the time that it came out, because it's all about it's sort of a screed against a cautionary tale, I should say, against premarital sex, which there is none of in this movie. There's not even a hint of it, really. It's just the woman, played by Sally Eilers, in a pretty good performance for the time, I should say. She hangs out with this guy for one night, and it's enough to give her a bad reputation with her brother, and then they get married, and the rest of the movie is just sort of this sweet little slice of life love story about these two down on their luck people trying to have a baby. And, which is nothing wrong with that, but it is odd that this movie retains the title of Bad Girl, and that all the marketing, including the poster, makes it seem as though it's going to be something much more risque and daring. But even in pre-code Hollywood, this material was deemed to be too spicy for movie screens. But in terms of the movie itself, I think Frank Borzage is an interesting director. It's something that this is a guy who won 2 Oscars for directing, one of the only people to do that, and he's never really talked about anymore. I think it's because this movie is kind of forgettable, and it doesn't age well. It's more of watching it again yesterday. It was more interesting to watch this because of its outdated attitudes about women and sexuality, and it's really interesting to watch this in the Me Too world that we live in, because this bad girl of the title gets hit on by every single man in the movie that she comes into contact with. Mm-hmm. And although the title would suggest otherwise, she rejects their advances, Mm-hmm. So I think it's more interesting to watch for that reason than it is as a entertaining movie.
I mean, speaking to the title and the poster, I mean, just like watching the first half or 2/3 of this, I was like, okay, maybe they should have called this Bad Guy, because right away I got a pretty bad vibe from Eddie.
Yeah.
With his very generalizing comments about women and sort of slut-shaming Dorothy for dressing a certain way. And the fact that a romance develops from that conversation. At first I was a bit thrown off by that. But, I do think that I probably like this movie a little more than you do, even though I don't think it's, great. I do give it credit for sort of establishing earlier in the film, laying the groundwork for why she would be attracted to a guy like Eddie, because before that scene we do see how she's just harassed by every man she comes in contact with, and they're really playing games with her in a way. And I think with how Dorothy is shown to be intelligent and street smart, I think she respects someone who's more of a straight shooter, even though at the beginning it felt like this was a prime example of a relationship that's like, I can change him, I can fix him. Sure, he's rough around the edges, but he's a big softy on the inside, and he's honest. Which sort of ends up being true, but I do kind of respect how unlikable he's presented through quite a bit of the film, rather than being like that super charming guy, because I guess this is more realistic, and I imagine that an audience in the middle of the Great Depression would recognize something more truthful in that character and in Dorothy than in maybe a lot of films that Hollywood made at the time.
Yeah. I mean, I should say I don't hate this movie. I think it's just kind of aged badly.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. There are moments in the movie that I do like. And I especially do like the lead performance, as I said earlier. Her male counterpart is a little ropey in some scenes. Mm-hmm. And I think also it's just, Borzage was somebody who came out of the silent era, and he did have a good sense of visuals in a lot of ways. But the thing that I think hampers this movie is its script, and that's a problem that a lot of early sound movies have, um, because they really didn't know how to work with this new technology, right? Um,
Hmm.
they were either, you know, shooting it in such a way that was locked down and stilted because they didn't want the cameras to make noises as it moved, or they thought the solution to dealing with sound was to just have basically filmed stage plays, um, and so there's this theatricality to the dialogue that feels very arch and
Hmm.
mannered, and very keeping with sort of the Clifford Odets style of the time. There's also a a uh, a tendency in the storytelling to lean into melodrama,
Hmm.
because again, like that was what happened in the silent films, right? You know, they
Yeah.
were they were all these kinds of twists and turns, and I mean, not to give anything away to people who might want to catch up on this 90-year-old movie and don't want spoilers, but it's kind of, there's many moments in the last half hour of this movie where a lot of the drama could be cleared up with just a simple sentence from one of the characters,
Yep.
and it never is, and so it adds a lot of unnecessary uh, uh, melodrama, and I think those are the things that really um, keep this from being one of the great movies of this period.
Hmm.
And I mean, I think, I mean, I gave the movie like 3 stars out of 5, because I do think that there are good scenes and good moments in it, but I do think that it's it doesn't hold up as well, and it doesn't hold up as well as some of Frank Borzagi's. I never know how to pronounce his name. Is it?
Me neither.
um, but it doesn't hold up as well as some of his other films, and especially some of his silent films, like the ones that you're going to be talking about
Hmm.
at the first Academy Awards.
Yeah. This, I totally agree that this is such a classic case of a story where if these characters just communicated with each other like normal human beings,
Yeah,
they would have practically no problems at all, which is true of many stories, to be fair. I'm aware of that. But for me, the conflict itself was a bit contrived, especially in that middle to late portion. And usually in a case like this, you would be able to understand, like, okay, this is where this person is coming from, this is where this other person is coming from, and both sides kind of make sense, and I understand why there's this conflict between them. But here, it's almost a kind of a frustrating watch at times because it's these two characters who are almost going out of their way to not communicate with each other,
hmm
in a way that's like very artificial feeling. Like the story is kind of guiding them to do these things rather than them making these choices because that's what they would do.
yeah, and like again, it's just that was the style of the times for a lot of dramatic cinema. You know,
Hmm.
um, not every not every movie of the time was like that. Um, some did it a little better than others, but it's in these movies that are supposed to be slice of lives, and that's what this movie is. This is supposed to be a slice of life chamber drama. It feels a lot more uh, galling, I should
Hmm.
say, when you're supposed to be watching people perform realistic behaviors, and they're doing anything but that.
Hmm.
Um, but like I said, I mean, there are good moments in this movie. I think that the first 30 minutes of it are probably the best, when they're first getting to know each other. And like you said earlier, I mean, you're seeing the way that other men treat this woman, and how it contrasts with James Dunn's character when she meets him.
Hmm.
And I think that there's some really good moments uh, of portraying tenement life at that time. Um, Even though, again, I mean, it's very theatrical and arch, and very much like a play. At least it's trying to reflect the reality of the time that a lot of people were going through.
Yeah, I'm sure some of these themes about not having enough money to have the life that you want and just the economic disparity is something that did resonate with audiences and possibly even Academy voters at the time, even though, yes, many of them were probably rich and not really dealing with these situations. But I do think that the performers in it, James Dunn and Sally Eilers, aren't quite on the level of like Oscar worthy for me, but I do feel like they do elevate some of this material through some of their chemistry. We can just talk about these performances here with James Dunn, who would win an Oscar for A Tree Grows in Brooklyn in the 40s. He's playing Eddie. I thought he was good here, though I did find that he was going a bit too big for the character sometimes, and then it was kind of one note.
Yeah.
I don't know if you feel the same way.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I think that was, they were figuring out how to act in the sound era, you know.
Yeah.
In the silent movies, it was, you had to go over the top because all you were communicating with were your eyes and your expressions. And I thought, okay, well, that's what we've got to do. It is so interesting watching this movie, and watching movies as they started to figure out, how to work with the medium. That you didn't have to go over the top with everything that you said. You could internalize a lot of things, right? I mean, there's still a lot of carryover technique from stage acting in these early movies because they figured, well, that's how you got to work with sound, is you have to approach it almost like a play in the writing and in the framing of it and in the acting of it. And the great thing about the medium of film is that you're able to pick up on little subtleties of expression that you can't on a stage. Just to like contrast this movie with something that's coming out right now, I thought a lot about Nomadland when I was watching this movie, because that's another slice of life character study that's very much commenting on the times that we're living in. And I just imagined what that movie would have been like filmed in 1931. Maybe Francis McDormand would have been monologuing quite a bit.
I'm sure there would have been a lot of grand speeches. Yes.
Yeah. I'm just a poor old woman traveling around this here. She would have been played by Marie Dressler, probably.
Yes. With James Dunn, I mean, it's a solid performance. I think he's kind of presented as this guy who has had to work all his life, and he has these very high standards, and he kind of leans into that stubbornness pretty well, and I think that's natural. But then there's these other moments where he's asked to be more tender, where he's falling in love with Dorothy, and we're seeing his softer side, but he's sort of just playing it at the same frequency as some of those hard-edged kinds of scenes. And that can work considering the type of person that he is, but he's just making a lot of very obvious choices that I don't think he really makes the character come alive as much as it could. But with Sally Eilers, I found her to actually be quite captivating, and she felt a little bit more contemporary than some of the broader actresses of this time period. I mean, she still has to deliver some dialogue that is melodramatic in that way, that's like, oh, Eddie, of course I'll marry you, that sort of thing. But she does a lot with her body language and her face to really, I think, show the internal conflict that she's going through, especially when they've just gotten married and she's at her friend Edna's place and she calls up Eddie, but he doesn't answer, and she just kind of assumes that he's left her, and just her realization that might have happened, I think she plays really well. And then there's the part where she's pregnant, but she chooses not to tell him because, like, he's getting ready to start a business of his own, and she doesn't want him to feel a certain way about also having to worry about a baby, so she just lies and says she wants to go back to work. I mean, I think the scene itself is kind of strangely conceived, but I think she sells those moments well. And I think at the very end, she has a lot of great silent work that she does.
Well, I mean, yeah, again, there's you mentioned that scene, and it would completely be cleared up with her just telling him that she's pregnant, as
Yeah,
opposed to, lying about, well, I gotta go back to work, and be like, well, no wife of mine is going to be working. That ain't the way I'm doing it. Um, but
right.
she really does feel more contemporary than a lot
Mm,
of the other people in the movie. And I do, like you, I find her captivating to watch.
yeah.
Um, you know, she she really she does a lot to engender empathy for this character, who, throughout the movie is uh, being being looked at in a certain way by all
Hmm.
of the men. We talked about how misleading the title of the movie is, Bad Girl, because she's anything but that. But I do think it's interesting, in a contemporary standpoint, to look at the ways in which attitudes about women's independence, and the way a woman dresses, and the way that a woman carries herself could have um, could have gotten her labeled as, a tramp,
Hmm.
a bad girl, right? Um, when of course she's not that at all,
Right.
right? But it is interesting to see how those attitudes have changed a lot.
Hmm. And watching the first 20 or to 30 minutes or so, kind of like you were saying, that was your favorite part of the film. I did wish that there was more of that kind of societal talk about like expectations of women and the relationships between men and women, which we see kind of thematically between this relationship at the center, but I feel like I wanted more of that really satirical kind of discussion that is
Mm-hmm.
sort of dropped mostly. But there is, we have to talk about this scene stealer, Minna Gombel,
Yeah,
as as Edna, which is where we get a lot of those things that I was talking about. And I think honestly that she totally would have gotten in if the supporting categories were around then,
right. I,
probably.
I agree.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, there's this line she says where she's talking to Dorothy's brother, and she goes off on this big monologue that's just like totally blasting him for calling her sister a tramp. And she ends with this line where she says, "See you in the cemetery."
yeah,
Just the pure venom that she is spitting in that moment made me laugh out loud more than anything else in this film. I think she's wonderful.
yeah. She's hilarious, and that whole scene afterwards where she she's having troubles with her kid who's destroying the
Yes.
home. It's hilarious because her timing is on point. You know,
Yeah.
like all those scenes, it almost feels like she's in a different movie in a lot of ways, because she's performing almost like a slapstick comedy
Oh, totally. Yeah.
from the era. But yeah, she's wonderful. I loved all those scenes with her.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about how Frank Borzage is our best director winner for this. And I think for his part, this is a pretty solid directorial effort. I don't
Yeah,
put too much of my complaints onto what he was bringing to the table because I think it's a pretty, handsomely made film working with what feels like a pretty low budget. Um, I really like the framing of a few scenes where, like the one where Eddie and Dorothy are at the bottom of the stairs of her apartment and
yeah,
people are just coming and going. The way he just kind of lets those scenes play out, which does, to bring up what we've been talking about, feel very much like a play. But I think their intimacy really makes you buy into their connection in those types of scenes.
Well, again, he was somebody who came up from the silent era, and the first Oscar he won was for a silent movie, Seventh
Mm-hmm.
Heaven. And when you came up in the silent era, I think that your translation to sound films was more successful, because you had a better sense of how to tell a story visually, right? And a lot
Mm-hmm.
of the films of this period made the mistake of sacrificing the visual language for the written word. And Borzage does do a lot of great work visually in this movie. And there are some inventive moments in there, too. I think about the scene where she first meets Eddie. There's this shot that's like on the back of a roller coaster. And, you're following, the roller coaster as it goes around the track. I wish there had been more of that stuff in there. Right. But I love that he found ways to sneak it in. There's a beautiful shot too where she's waiting for him out in the rain, and it's all just like the city at night, and all the shadows and all that is really beautifully done. And again, it's like that's from his background of you have to find a way to visually convey to the audience what's going on. So, I mean, I agree with you. I think that it's as well directed as the script could be.
Right. And there's a lot of shifting tones in the film from scene to scene, just like balancing the melodrama and some of the more understated conversations and the satirical elements where it's tackling the gender roles and the relationships between men and women, which, again, is very much at its strongest when it's Dorothy and Edna together, and they're basically kind of sharing this specific language between the two of them that's only really known to them when it comes to like how they feel about men. So I think that he does quite a bit to make the film come alive from the source material, even if that source material doesn't always work. Yeah. Well, let's get into a bit of spoilers here. So for anyone who wants to see the film before we delve into the ending, as of now, it is fully available for free on YouTube. And I know it's on some streaming services as well. So go watch that. It's an hour and a half. Come back. Okay, so I want to talk about this ending where Eddie is going off to make money to support his wife, and he's becoming a boxer. But once again, he's not telling her the truth of what he's doing. She just assumes that he's neglecting her by just going off and staying out late at night. He does have a strong moment, James Dunn, of really pouring his heart out to the doctor, which is very melodramatic, but a good scene for him. Clearly, like the Oscar scene, if there was one for him. But pretty soon she delivers the baby. They have yet another miscommunication where he says, like, hey, I know we have a kid, but pretty soon we'll just forget about it and we'll still have our life. But ultimately they do end up coming together, and they get in a taxi cab with their baby and presumably go on to live happily ever after. So I have to admit, some part of me wanted it to be like the end of The Graduate, where they just like sit there in silence and realize that now they have a baby, so they're just bonded together, but they still have to work out all of these issues in their relationship, and maybe they have regrets about getting married so quick because they have this fundamental flaw, in my eyes, where they can't ever communicate what they're really feeling to each other. And I don't know if like the one conversation they have at the end will necessarily solve everything, considering just the full extent of what they've done. Like, yes, there's still love there, especially him towards her, but I don't know if she's fully there by the end of the film. What did you make of this ending?
First of all, becoming a boxer to raise money is very much a 1930s movie trope.
Completely. Yeah.
It's just like, and it also, again, I mean, if he had just told her, look, I went to raise some money so that you could get this doctor who you said you wanted to deliver the baby because you were afraid of dying. I don't understand why he kept that a secret from her, because, you know, he comes back with his face all beaten up. He's got the money for the doctor, and she's just like, oh, look at you. You went and got into a drunken brawl on the night that I'm set to deliver my baby,
right.
Which I'm absolutely not showing any weight gain from.
Well, there's that.
Yeah, I mean, it is just bizarre. You would think, like, if if two people can't tell the truth with each other about things like that, then maybe raising a child together is not the best idea. But yeah, I mean, I will say I was rooting for them to get together. Of course, I'm a big softie, and so I was happy when they got together again. But
When they finally got it together and spoke to each other.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think you mentioned sort of graduate-esque ending of this, and it made me think what a more interesting movie this would be if it had been about the dangers of not being able to communicate in a marriage. If it had really taken a contemporary view of that, but unfortunately, that wasn't the having that kind of ambiguity in storytelling wouldn't come about for another 35 years. But
I was hoping for it personally.
Yeah,
But
something, right?
actually, I don't remember if you remember this, but there's this scene where they're at the bottom of the stairs and they're talking about how like someone had their baby on the second floor and then someone died on the fifth floor.
Yeah.
And I was like, is this going to be like foreshadowing where like she's going to have a baby, but like maybe he's going to screw up somewhere and he's going to die. And then she's just going to be like with this kid and it's going to be like a super sad ending. I was like, is it really laying the groundwork for that? And I was like,
it felt like it might go that way, especially because I mean, she's talking about how her mother died in childbirth. So I thought maybe it would be that way. Yeah, that might have been the original ending that they were going for. Who knows?
Yeah.
And studio notes dictated a change.
Of course.
But yeah. I mean, it's just the most ridiculous parts of this movie are in the last 30 minutes, and that's what kind of knocks it down a few notches for me. But I'm not gonna lie. Like when they were in the cab together, I was kind of like, "Oh, that's nice. They're gonna be together." Even
it's
though
a very well done scene. Yeah.
But
it really leaves you on a high. Yeah.
And it was very nice of that doctor who you need to be a millionaire to get to not accept any payment after this poor guy had destroyed his face.
I know. Yeah. Interesting film. Very interesting. I will sort of agree with you on the whole that just like the first half or so are probably the film at its best. And as things go along, it sort of feels like more contrived by the scene ultimately. But then it does have a really nice happy ending that sort of leaves you feeling like, okay, well, that was a nice little journey with these two people. And maybe I won't think about it as much as I would if some of the themes we were talking about in like alternate story routes maybe would have been more interesting to have like that discussion after a movie where you're really just like going back and forth about what it all means. So I don't know, would I recommend it? Perhaps. I would say that it is worth a watch, and just from looking at some of the Letterboxd reviews that I've seen from some friends, people have been surprised by its approach and just kind of this slice of life journey between these two characters, and so you might like it. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I think if nothing else, if you're like us and you want to fill in gaps in your Oscar history viewing,
or that
there's worse films you can watch, especially from this period.
Agreed. And I would also say it's not even the worst film in this Best Picture lineup.
No,
so,
not by a mile.
We'll get into that a little later. So, any other thoughts on Bad Girl before we move on to the Oscar discussion?
I think this movie would have been vastly improved by casting MIA as the Bad Girl title. But
Sure. So, okay, Zach.
Yeah, that's me being a little silly. So.
Thank you. On that note, when we come back, we will be discussing why Bad Girl lost Best Picture to Grand Hotel.
Come on, baby.
Hey, please, will you? My nerves. Hey, ain't there any other tune you can almost sing?
You ain't told me your name.
Joe.
I used to know a fella named Joe. He drove a Ford. Did you ever meet him?
Well, I might have at that. No. No. The guy I knew drove a Chevrolet and his name was Fred. No. It couldn't have been the same guy.
Oh, you're quite a kidder.
Yeah, you profess yourself.
Just fresh enough. Say, what makes you such a grouch?
Jane's like you. You work all day in some store and then you rush home to sleep at night in some stuffy tenement. And you'll be content to do it for the rest of your life. Because you're just a good time girl. This is where you want to be with a lot of saps like that. Yelling their heads off and thinking they're enjoying themselves. You ain't got brains enough to realize that now is the time you ought to be saving your money and trying to make something better of yourself.
Well, you're here, ain't you?
I'm here to get fresh air. But you notice I ain't spending any dough on you, don't you? Not even an ice cream soda.
Say, listen, you big stiff. If you think I'm worried about you buying me an ice cream soda, you're crazy. Well, I wouldn't be found dead with you.
Thanks for bringing me home. I had a swell time.
Okay. Well, do you want to see me again?
Oh, I should say not. Well, accidents will happen. Well, I gotta go. I gotta go upstairs now.
And we're back. So now we'll be discussing why Bad Girl lost Best Picture to Grand Hotel. And Bad Girl was nominated for 3 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director for Frank Borzage, and Best Adaptation. And it won for Best Director and Best Adaptation. Like I said, the only one it didn't win was Best Picture. So it had a good, strong combination of directing and writing, which is something that we as Oscar prognosticators look to be like, oh, maybe this is our Best Picture winner. And yet, it does not win Best Picture, because it loses to a movie that had no other nominations, Grand Hotel. So, Zach, how the hell did this happen?
Well, I think that Grand Hotel it gave people what they wanted at the time that they needed it. It was this very lavish, all-star melodrama set in an immaculate hotel, a grand hotel, as they say, with lots of expensive jewelry and champagne and dinner gowns in the height of the Great Depression. And I think that was a vision of life that people wanted to see at that moment, as opposed to this film, which was much more contemporary in its approach and much more about living in that moment, struggling to get by and living in tenements. I think that obviously they respected Bad Girl a lot since they gave it the writing and directing awards. But I think that Grand Hotel was more in line with what they wanted to honor, because that was the life that everyone wanted to be leading at that moment.
Yeah, very good points. And I think this is another very classic case of them just picking the film that has the most lavish production and the film that has, a big ensemble of characters. I mean, it's the same thing that has carried so many films to win Best Picture all the way through, I would say, like the 90s. It hasn't necessarily been the case as much in the 21st century necessarily, but really when you think of Best Picture in the minds of Academy members, they think of a movie like Grand Hotel, which has all these characters and is about these themes, and it's about like this group of people who are coming together in this one location, and they're all kind of at different places in their life, and they're trying to figure things out. And it also still has all of the lavish production design and camera work and costumes and just all of these things that add up to a Best Picture. And it is so ironic to me that this is a movie that doesn't have any other nominations, because you would expect something like this, even though we should clear up that, they didn't necessarily have all of the categories that they have now for a movie like this that would probably get into those. But the fact that it's saying like the directing, the writing, the acting, the text, none of those are worthy. And yet it all comes together and makes it the best picture of the year. Kind of a dissonance there.
Yeah, it is strange. And like you say, you always have to have an asterisk next to these Oscars, I think, because if if it had been like today, and they had 5 nominees in all the acting and directing and writing categories, and they had supporting categories, and they had categories like costume design, hair and makeup. I think that Grand Hotel would have gotten more nominations. Just looking at this cast alone, you're talking about Greta Garbo, John Barrymore, Joan Crawford, Wallace Beery, Lionel Barrymore. This would be a slam dunk SAG Ensemble winner in the modern era. And I think you probably would have, it's surprising that Garbo didn't get nominated because she was such a huge star at that point, and she was what made the movie iconic. I think her line of "I want to be alone." That's the one thing that everybody remembers from Grand Hotel, if nothing else. It's just high class melodramatic fun. I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts on Grand Hotel as a movie in the modern era?
I mean, I like this film. I think the mood and sort of the conceit that this hotel is a place where people go for a second chance or for some big opportunity, that's a really interesting theme. They're all kind of looking to just ease their pain for a bit. And even though it only takes place in this one location, there is that expansiveness to it and a bit more of a complexity to the story it's telling than some people would give it credit for between all these different storylines. So again, I can see why the Academy was drawn to it, considering the other films in this lineup that don't really have that. And I think all of the performers are wonderful, actually. I think Greta Garbo, John Barrymore, Joan Crawford with her wonderful eyebrows are very fun. Wallace Beery playing
supporting actress nominated.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. She's very sympathetic, I think, in the film. And I really love Lionel Barrymore as this guy who is going to die soon. Yeah. And he just kind of wants this one experience at this hotel, and things are difficult for him. It's a very sympathetic performance as well. So, yeah, I generally like it. Not anywhere near a top-tier Best Picture winner by any means, but still good.
Yeah, I mean, it's enjoyable, and it's an interesting kind of, of its time film. It's like this and Dinner at 8, which came out the year after, always kind of get lumped in together for me because they were both MGM films with that were lavish star vehicles, and it was basically just have an excuse to get all of our top tier talent in a in a setting together and have them drink champagne and deal with whatever problems they're dealing with, and we'll make millions of dollars off of it because that's what Depression era audiences were hungry for.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean it's hokey and ropey in a lot of ways, but I think it's a fun watch.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, for better or for worse, this is one of the forebearers of the big all-star ensemble film, all set in one location that we would just continue to see, especially in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. With
like the Towering Inferno, Airport, things like that, which your mileage may vary on how you feel about those, but kind of set a trend.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. I think you see films like this today, that are all just about like let's get as many stars as we can in these roles, and just have them go at it, right?
See what happens.
Yeah, like The Help comes to mind.
American Hustle.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So,
yeah. Prime example. I think Bad Girl is one of those examples. Maybe it's not exactly like this, but definitely feels like that classic split of like Grand Hotel makes us feel good and feel better about our lives, and then this other movie maybe is more grounded and gritty and realistic, and it's like we respect this, but we're not really going to give it Best Picture.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's funny how some things never change with the Oscars.
Truly, truly.
Because I think you're right. They probably did respect Bad Girl more as this is an important film that should be honored. But Grand Hotel was the movie that we really enjoy.
Yes, but Grand Hotel has Greta Garbo, so
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's what it comes down to. We have multiple questions about both Bad Girl and Grand Hotel, so strap in. All right. Ronaldo Sosa, quite simply, who was the bad girl? It's a good question.
I think that if you were actually going to pick a bad girl, it'd probably be Mina Gamble, right? I mean,
yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. I
Comparatively.
thought the movie would be about her. So.
Yes. And Jackson DeStefano basically asked the same question. Do you think Bad Girl's title fits the film? No, absolutely not. It definitely, again, I'm thinking of like being an audience member just with my hard-earned money in 1932 and just seeing a poster and seeing the title Bad Girl and being like, this looks interesting. I might go pay and see this, and then being treated to this film about marital strife where there is no bad girl and there's no even like sauciness that the poster might have promised. So
this poster is not, I mean, like I'm looking at it. Anybody look at the poster for this movie.
I know.
And then watch the movie. I mean, it's not even the guy who she's got her arm wrapped around is wearing a tuxedo. And she is about as scantily dressed as you could get away with for the time.
Truly.
So, like, it's not at all what the actual movie is.
Yeah. Pretty much one of the prime examples of false advertising.
Well,
I'm just thinking of like Cinema Score, people going to see this and being like, well, this didn't satisfy what I thought it was going to be. F.
Yeah, exactly. It's movie studios always advertise the movie that they wish had been made as opposed to the one that actually was made. So
that is truth. That is truth right there. This is from Chelsea. Bad Girl had to go through extensive rewrites and to comply with the Hays office. Is this a film that deserves a modern update free of the code?
I mean, I think that there are themes you could explore. I wonder how it would in this modern era, because the story is all about how dangerous it is for a woman to be promiscuous and engage in premarital sex and how that can ruin your life. I don't know how well that would translate today.
Yeah, I think this would be another case of like adapting some of the source material, but really trying to put a modern, more feminist spin on this.
Yeah.
And kind of like using the tagline of Bad Girl as like some type of ownership in a way. So, I don't know.
I mean, in a way, we already have a modern update of this material. It was Lars von Trier's Nymphomaniac.
Well, there you go.
So, yeah, just watch a Lars von Trier movie if you want to see if you want to see what a modern day take of Bad Girl would be. So.
There you go. You heard it here. Fritz in the Oscars says, why do you think no acting nominations or other nominations for Grand Hotel?
Well, I think it was just an issue of they only nominated 3 people in each category. There were no supporting categories. I think that if it had been the way that it is today, 20 acting nominees a year, 5 directing nominees, 5 writing, I think it probably would have gotten more.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just a matter of there not being enough slots at the end of the day. But at the same time, I do think it is a bit surprising that it doesn't get in for directing, at least.
Yeah.
Because it's such a lavish production.
Well, I think what it is even back then, the director's branch or whatever the equivalent of that was back then. They picked their favorites, and these three guys, Frank Borzage, King Vidor, Joseph von Sternberg, those were giants of the time. They were all great silent movie directors who had translated into sound, and those were like the top tier filmmakers. And Edmund Goulding was, probably not thought of in that same way at the time.
Yeah, probably not. But I'm also just looking at the cast, and I think one issue might just be who would you single out for an acting nomination? Because it is such an ensemble cast, and I don't know if they all kind of have like equal screen time, but still not quite enough of all of these leads here. I don't know.
Yeah, and the guy,
I don't know who you pick out.
Well, Wallace Beery was nominated that same year, won for The Champ, so they're not going to nominate him for Grand Hotel over that. Garbo would be who I'd put in. It's so funny. I'm looking at the acting nominees, and there's two from The Guardsman, Alfred Lunt and Lynn Fontaine, who were both contemporary stage performers who everyone thought of as like, the best that acting could be at that moment. And they're both nominated for a film that no one ever talks about anymore. The
Guardsman, yes.
Is that even available? I've never even, I don't know if you can even find this movie anywhere. So,
yeah, and also they were married, we should say.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
Congrats on, I think, the first instance of a married couple being nominated in the same year.
Yeah. And two people who went right back to the New York stage after this was done.
Yeah.
They wanted nothing to do with the movie business.
Which is fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's get back to these questions about Grand Hotel. Jeffrey Kerr said Grand Hotel is still the only film to date that managed to win Best Picture without a single nomination in any other category. Did it deserve recognition elsewhere? Well, you've already mentioned Greta Garbo, so...
Yeah, I think so.
Art direction is an obvious one for me.
I'm surprised it was not, if you'd think there'd be one place. It's in the title of the movie.
Right, truly.
Yeah.
Cinematography, why not?
Yeah.
Directing, I wouldn't mind. So
if there were 5 slots,
that's true.
There's a lot of people they had 8 Best Picture nominees, and they snubbed a lot of people. So
yeah. Gabriel Guarin said, why didn't Edmund Goulding get a directing nomination for Grand Hotel? We sort of already covered that. I think it's just in terms of name recognition and reputation tends to factor in these earlier years. Mark Lamb said, who gave the best performance in Grand Hotel? I'm going to say Joan Crawford. I don't know. What do you think? Yeah. Do you really think Greta Garbo?
I think
I'm not like questioning you or like accusing you, but yeah.
Yeah. I think Joan Crawford's probably the more interesting performer in the movie. And I think Garbo's just like the most iconic part of it.
Of course. Yeah.
But yeah, I think Joan Crawford gives the best performance. Yeah.
I would say Lionel Barrymore.
Oh, he's great too.
I think his arc is really quite compelling. One of the more compelling threads of the film. Ronaldo Sosa said, do you agree with Mr. Kringleine's creed, a short life and a gay one?
Sure,
which is in Grand Hotel. Yeah. I hope it's not a short life.
I hope
but hopefully it's a gay one. Yeah. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Jackson DeStefano, if you were to remake Grand Hotel today, who would you cast?
Oh, God. Well, who would you even put in as Greta Garbo? Yeah.
I just wrote down a few actors that people enjoy that probably would make sense in a movie like this. I wrote down Saoirse Ronan. Maybe she plays Greta Garbo part. I don't know. She has kind of the build for it.
Yeah.
Oscar Isaac. I just want to see him in a suit. I wrote down Mark Rylance for the Lionel Barrymore part.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the Joan Crawford part, I said Samara Weaving.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Or maybe like Gugu Mbatha-Raw, someone like that.
You know, they already remade Grand Hotel. It was Bobby, that Emilio Estevez movie. Remember that one?
Well, yes.
So maybe just transport the cast from that into this one. Yeah.
Yes.
It's so like it's so hard to say because I mean it's like part of what made this movie iconic was that it was playing off of the stars' personas. You know,
Right.
I mean, Greta Garbo was, you know, like this was the kind of part she always played, and Wallace Beery always played the working guy kind of, you know, and it's just, you know, who would you like? What are the equivalents of those people today? I like the first thing that popped in my mind for who should play Greta Garbo was Isabelle Huppert. Just like I don't,
maybe
you know,
younger.
Doesn't matter how old she is. Let's just have it be her. You know.
Yeah, she does look quite a bit like her. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wrote down Russell Crowe for the Wallace Beery part.
Okay. Yeah, he's got the build.
Just seems
for
like
that now.
Yeah, the type of guy who'd be a little rough and tumble.
Yeah, I could see. Yeah.
So, me with your suggestions.
Yeah, please do tell us who you would cast
Yes.
in Grand Hotel, and
That could be interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
All right, let's move on to our other Best Picture nominees, shall we?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go in alphabetical order here. I will just say we are coming to the end of an era here where we're talking about more than 5 Best Picture nominees. As we go backwards, there will only be 5, and in a few cases, 3. So that's fun. Outside of the 2019 episode I'll be doing, that's sort of inserted towards the end. But basically for this era, this is the last instance of more than 5 nominees. So let's get to... Yeah. Let's get to Aerosmith first. Not to be confused with the band. Okay. I was not a fan of this. I'm just going to come out and just say it. So
Yeah.
it's based on a Sinclair Lewis novel. It's about a doctor who is called to help treat the bubonic plague in the West Indies, and he has a vaccine that he's developed. Sounds like an interesting concept on paper. Execution-wise, I found it to be kind of lacking. I don't know how you feel.
This is one of the John Ford movies that nobody talks about anymore, and for good reason. Like, it's okay. It's just not... it doesn't have Ford's sense of visual style. It doesn't... Even though it's about, like, you know, a guy performing an honorable task, it doesn't seem like his heart is really in the material in the same way that it is in something like The Informer just a few years later, or
Right.
Stagecoach. You know, this felt kind of like a, you know, one of his 4 hire jobs.
Exactly.
Yeah, like it's not badly made. It's just, you know, like it's just not one of the movies that, you know, you think of when you think what made John Ford a great director, right?
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I not a huge fan either. Let's say.
Yeah. So we have Ronald Coleman, who I typically enjoy, but just does not make this character of Dr. Aerosmith someone who is worth caring about, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
He basically neglects his wife, played by a completely wasted Helen Hayes, who is just stuck in this supporting wife role. But Aerosmith overall just has such a dull personality that I just didn't feel anything one way or the other about him. There's also some questionable stuff in regards to like the scientific process that feels very rudimentary and just not really something that a contemporary audience would be behind. Just like these weird distinctions between advancing science and then also his duties as a doctor and how those are like opposed for some reason. It's a strange conflict here. Also, Myrna Loy very briefly shows up in this as a woman that Aerosmith has an affair with, but it's all just suggested and doesn't really talk about it directly, which is kind of funny. But she's totally wasted, just like Helen Hayes. Yeah, didn't like it.
Didn't like it either. Yeah, watch other
Yeah,
John Ford movies. So,
that's absolutely right.
yeah.
Catherine Short asked us, John Ford stopped us from seeing the illicit affair between Myrna Loy and Ronald Colman that we all deserved. Would Aerosmith have been a stronger film if the infidelity subplot had actually been shot? I mean, sure.
It might have been a more interesting movie, at least. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it just, yeah, it's just kind of, there's no passion in any of this. That's the
No.
problem with it. Nothing
That's the
there.
overarching problem. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like Ford just kind of showed up and got the job done, and
Yeah.
there's none of his personality in it whatsoever.
Nope. Like you said, work for hire situation. Mark Lamb said, Aerosmith, Babbitt, Main Street, Sinclair Lewis wrote classic American novels, yet the movies were lousy to middling. Only Elmer Gantry seems to be the only one of his work to succeed. Why?
I think that it just, he was a hard guy to adapt. I will also stick up for Dodsworth.
Yes, totally.
William Wyler's movie. I think, there's just some guys who don't translate to the screen that well. Like Philip Roth is a prime example of that.
Yes.
It's just the writing is so dense, and the stories are so convoluted. It's just, you really have to have an impression of it as opposed to trying to literally adapt it. But I think it's just, it's a tough nut to crack.
Yeah. And I think that's true of so many classic authors that people try to adapt into film. Mm-hmm. It's just really hard to communicate the intricacies within those stories that make them so enduring for so many people onto film. So I know that's kind of a general answer, but I think it probably applies to Sinclair Lewis here too.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, let's move on to The Champ. The
Yeah.
Champ. So this is a very emotional story about a boxer who is nicknamed The Champ, who is also, yes, he is the titular role, an alcoholic, and he has a young son who adores him. And The Champ, he's also a gambler, and he really ends up throwing away a lot of his money and ruining opportunities just because he's an alcoholic, which is pretty heartbreaking. And it's a very tender story of a father and a son that is dealing with things like, second chances and faith. And for me, it's quite moving because of the performances here by Wallace Beery, who we just mentioned, as well as little Jackie Cooper.
I like this movie.
Yeah.
I think that it holds up better than a lot of melodramas of this time, because I think there is more. It's not based in melodramatic twists and turns in the same way that something like Bad Girl is. It is more based in character like the relationships feel more grounded, as opposed to, it's not like they're hiding something from each other, or everything could be cleared up with one line of dialogue type of thing. It's much more about the internal conflict that this guy is going through and how that affects his son. So I think, I like this movie, and I think that the director King Vidor does a really good job of keeping the drama grounded in this.
Yeah, totally. Well, we're going to talk more about Jackie Cooper on the next episode when we talk about Skippy. And here I think he's delivering one of the better child performances that I've seen. He does kind of have that classic, gee whiz style that that you would see a lot from child actors in this time, but he's also really able to communicate his emotions really well in some of those tear-jerking scenes at the very end of the film, which I won't spoil, but it's a very affecting performance. And then
it is.
Wallace Beery ends up winning Best Actor in a tie with someone that we'll talk about in a little bit. I think he's good. He has the same kind of lumbering energy that we that we talked about with like Victor McLaglen in The Informer, where he's just like this big lug and he can't help himself but to get into trouble. And it can be frustrating to watch some of his behavior, but it's also very human and understandable, I think, in a way that separates it from, as you were saying, separates it from Bad Girl. Yeah. So if I had to wager, I would say that The Champ was probably close to being a runner-up. And if I hadn't gone for Bad Girl, I would probably have picked The Champ, because it's maybe not the most original film even at the time, but it has that classic heart-tugging element and that underdog story feeling that is a very similar path that a lot of films would take to getting nominations and wins. So
yeah, it does have a rooting factor to it. I think there's probably a lot of people who were pulling for it. You know, I mean, it has that kind of like that sentimental audience favorite type thing going for it. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good movie that holds up pretty well, considering how old it is, and a lot of that is due to just the performances by Wallace Beery and Jackie Cooper. You know, even though it's very much acting of the time, it feels less stilted and ham-fisted than a lot of other movies of this period. And right. I think you have to owe a lot of that to director King Vidor, who was one of the great silent filmmakers, and who made a really great movie that you'll be talking about in your first, if you can track it down, The Crowd, which is a masterpiece.
Yeah, well, Cody Derricks asked us, going all the way back to The Champ, Hollywood has always loved boxing movies. Why do you think that is, and what are some of your favorites?
I mean, I think there's just inherent drama in the ring, you know? It's very primal. You know, like you're putting your body through the paces. And I think there's just something very elemental about boxing dramas. Raging Bull is the greatest example of this by far.
Yeah.
Rocky is great too. Creed.
Definitely Creed.
Yeah.
Yep.
And The Champ is one of the great ones. I'm trying to think of what other ones are there.
I really liked Warrior.
Oh yeah.
From 2011. I mean, I guess you could throw in The Fighter as well.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. But I think you're right that I think just on a fundamental level there is that primal nature to it that, you know, it's just this one guy, and usually in these situations it's a guy who has been through a lot and is kind of resorting to this, or they're trying to express themselves almost through what they do, that it just makes it just a inherently human and compelling story that will always endure, because it's just like it's about this one, usually man. I mean, we could also say $1 Million Baby is another good example.
I just thought of another great one. Yeah, $1 Million Baby and Girl Fight.
Yep.
And like, you don't really, I think, because it usually is, you know, a man at the center of it, you know, it's easy to forget about those two films, but those are really great as well. And again, like, it's about people. It's usually about people searching for redemption, you know?
Right.
And feeling as though in order to achieve that, they have to punish their bodies in a certain way. There's something very watchable about that.
Yeah. Yep. This is from Steve K. Jackie Cooper got nominated for the previous year at age 9. Do you think he had a shot of getting nominated again this year for The Champ?
Sure. I mean, if there were supporting categories, yeah. He would have.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, he probably would have won if he was there, I would imagine.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's just another classic case of not having enough slots and also not having supporting categories, because otherwise he would have gotten, I mean, who knows, maybe he could have even gotten into the lead if they campaigned him there. I don't know.
He might have, yeah. If they'd had those 5 slots, yeah.
Yeah. Mark Lamb, which the champ is better? John Voight and Ricky Schroeder, or Wallace Beery and Jackie Cooper?
Well, considering the people involved, I'd say the 1931. But I think as a film too, the 1931 is better.
I haven't even seen the other one, and I don't really want to.
I mean, it's fine. It's just, you know, it's just exactly what you would think it would be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yes, the people involved are kind of turning me off from watching it. So
Yeah.
anyway,
not for nothing, Faye Dunaway's in it too. So
that's okay.
yeah.
Okay. Not quite enough for me. Sorry.
No. It's not even like if you're going to watch a John Voight movie, it's not even one of the better ones from that period.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to 5-star final. Oh boy. So this is a very cynical film, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. I would.
About the newspaper industry and how it can just ruin reputations just for the sake of getting more readers, you know? And it's about this tabloid newspaper that drubs up a 20-year scandal where a woman had shot her boss, but then she was acquitted because she was pregnant with his baby. So she had moved on, people had moved on, but then this newspaper ends up basically ruining not only her life, but just the lives of people around her. Very brutal stuff. One of those films that really is just directly exposing just the ugliness of humanity, even if it does have a happy ending for some of its characters. What do you think of this one?
I think that it's a really interesting movie, and I think Edward G. Robinson is great in it, as well as Boris Karloff in a small role, one of many films that he popped up in this year. I think some of the acting by the supporting cast is a little bad.
Okay.
But I do think that the themes that it explores are really interesting and really prescient for today. I mean, there's a lot of things that are a little of its time, but certainly the responsibility of journalists and how the media can how irresponsibility of the media can really can hurt people. I think is still a powerful message.
Of course. Yeah. One of the quotes I wrote down from this, just because it really impacted me, is when one of the female characters says, "I think you can always get people interested in the crucifixion of a woman."
Yeah.
Which is just really direct stuff there that, it's very impactful. And it only gets this Best Picture nomination, but I think this is a solid ensemble cast. I think Edward G. Robinson playing the managing editor of the paper is reliably great, I would say. He has that classic, like, cigar smoking, cynical, jaded vibe that you would expect from a character like that. Just very perfectly cast. And as you said, Boris Karloff is here. He's wonderful. And then with Frances Starr, that's a very key performance in that she's playing the woman who was involved in this scandal, and that's a very heartbreaking arc.
Yeah,
that she's married to someone and she's moved on, but now everything from her past has just come back to haunt her, and she didn't see it coming, and that character takes a very tragic turn, which was quite shocking. One of my favorites of this lineup.
Yeah, I think all three of them would have been worthy acting nominees. And we should shout out director Mervyn LeRoy.
Yes, of course.
Who was also snubbed this year. But he was one of those kind of great Hollywood journeymen of the period who made some really good movies in the 40s and 50s.
Yep. Speaking of journeyman, Trip Burton, said, "I can't remember if you've ever really talked about Edward G. Robinson, but why do you think he never got nominated? Should he have been for a 5-star final?"
He should have been nominated for many different movies.
Double Indemnity. How about that?
Yes, Double Indemnity. He should have won for that. What was that? Little Caesar, which was technically from the same year as 5-Star Finale, but was eligible at the previous year's Oscars. Yeah, I'd have,
Key Largo.
Given him
I would also
Key
throw
Largo,
in.
yes, another one he should have been up.
Yep.
Yeah, I would have nominated him for this, probably.
Yeah, but why do we think he never actually got it?
I think that he was just, there was a certain kind of character actor back in those days who was always reliable but never recognized.
Yeah,
I think that people just took him for granted, honestly.
Yeah, it's another one of those cases of a character actor who's very much taken for granted, and I would also throw in someone like John Goodman as someone who would be comparable to that. Just someone who always shows up in a film and you're happy to see him and he's delivering, but there's just something, it never quite gets to that like Academy level. And not to say that he's not at that level, because he's beyond that level, but just it's a very particular type of performance that, I don't know, it's just a different vibe.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's
Yeah.
so much of it has to do with timing as well. I mean,
Yeah.
you never would have thought you'd have Academy Award winners J.K. Simmons and Allison Janney.
Yeah.
And yet, here they are. You never would have
Right.
thought you'd have Academy Award nominee Laurie Metcalf, and yet there it was. So,
Yeah.
It's all timing, and also, I think, appreciation for the performer.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to 1 Hour with You.
Yes.
So there's always one film from this era where I watch it and I'm like, well, that was cute. Was it Best Picture worthy? I don't know. But it was certainly quite charming. And I can see why people would vote for it, just because it gives you the warm fuzzies,
Yeah, this was one of 2 Ernst Lubitsch movies nominated this year.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, it's I like it. I like it better than some other films that were in this lineup, because I think that it, I'm a sucker for Ernst Lubitsch films. He's one of my favorite directors, and I do think this is the second best of the 2 movies that got nominated this year of his. But yeah, I mean, I think for Lubitsch completists, which I am, this is certainly worth a watch.
Yeah, we have Maurice Chevalier and Jeanette MacDonald as this couple at the center, and it's just like this musical comedy about a married couple who are both being unfaithful to each other, and they're both really fun. There's a lot of breaking the fourth wall here, where we have Maurice Chevalier just like asking the audience, what would you do? In a way that's like, hey, can you blame me? Very catchy musical numbers. It's all kind of dated, to be honest, and a little bit pointless, but there is just like an easy charm to it that I can't say that there's too much wrong with it.
It is so interesting that these 2 movies got nominated in the same year. And 1 Hour with You. So this was 1932. That same year, Ernst Lubitsch released what many would consider to be his greatest movie, Trouble in Paradise, which was eligible at the next year's ceremony. It's fascinating that movie was completely ignored when the previous year they had nominated 2 of his musical comedies. I think that in Trouble in Paradise, you really see what people would refer to as the Lubitsch touch come into full form. And then it just was one masterpiece after another for him.
We got this question from Mark Lamb, who said, what's the deal? Who really directed 1 Hour with You? Ernst Lubitsch or George Cukor?
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah. So, okay, George Cukor had started the movie, didn't finish
Hmm.
it. Lubitsch came on, and then Cukor stayed as his assistant. This was
Right.
very early on in George Cukor's movie directing career. He had been a stage director before then, and there's another movie that we can talk about later
Hmm.
that he made this same year. But yeah, I mean, it was just he started it and didn't finish it. It happened
Yep.
all the time in this era of Hollywood.
It certainly did.
Yeah.
While we're here, let's just jump over this film and just talk about the Smiling Lieutenant, since we are
Hmm.
in the discussion of Ernst Lubitsch. So, I don't know why, but I didn't know that this was going to be a musical
Yeah.
before I watched it, which was just kind of a strange sensation when suddenly Maurice Chevalier was breaking into song, and I was like, oh, all right, cool. um, but again, another really fun movie with kind of a dumb concept. um,
Yeah.
so basically, Maurice Chevalier is playing a man who romances a woman played by Claudette Colbert. And at one point, he is like winking at her in a parade, but there's this princess who's visiting that's in the parade who thinks that he's winking at her. And then it just leads to him getting involved with the princess, and she's played by Miriam Hopkins. But of course, the problem is he still loves Claudette Colbert, so he goes off to visit her. Love triangle ensues. What do we think of this one?
I mean, again, like I'm a sucker for Lubitsch,
Mm-hmm.
and what makes his movies so great is their sense of sophistication. It is like both this and 1 Hour with You. They're both very silly, right?
Yeah.
They're both very frothy, but they're made with so much ease and so much sophistication and so much charm that you can forgive the contrivances. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because again, I mean, it's like it's not meant to be taken seriously. You know, it's meant to be sort of tongue in cheek, and we're all having great fun here. Yeah, I mean, I think that he perfected that uh, in the latter half of his career with Trouble in Paradise, and then going into things like Ninotchka, Shop Around the Corner, To Be or Not to Be, Clooney Brown. I mean, those are your top tier Lubitsch films there. But you know, I enjoy his early musicals because of just their sense of style and wit, and
Yeah.
Maurice Chevalier's winking performances.
Yes, very much so. They're just so easy to watch that you can see
Yeah,
why, like, if you are a fan, that you just like want to watch these over and over again.
yeah,
um but the film also has a really interesting scene towards the end where Claudette Colbert actually visits Miriam Hopkins, and they bond, and they sing about jazzing up their lingerie.
yeah.
And Claudette Colbert is actually encouraging Miriam Hopkins to try to woo Maurice Chevalier.
Mhm.
Um, just very fun. Where, I mean, I'm gonna say this: it's one of those movies where it's like these two people, Claudette Colbert and Miriam Hopkins, actually have more chemistry than the heterosexual romance that's supposed to be happening.
Yes,
So
yes.
that's kind of fun.
Very much a thing of the times. Yeah, where
Yes.
uh,
Yes.
these little allusions to yeah,
Yeah.
that's one of the fun things about it.
Yeah. And I walk away from the film wanting them to be together. So
Yeah.
there you
So
go.
interesting that both of these movies were nominated for Best Picture and nothing else.
I know.
It's a trend of that's four movies in the Best Picture lineup that were just nominated for
Yeah.
Best Picture.
It just
Like
completely defies any statistics we would have today.
yeah, I remember when they expanded it to 10 in 2009. There were a lot of people who thought that, are we going to have a movie that just gets nominated for Best Picture and nothing else? And we haven't, because I think that people just they think about it differently nowadays.
Yeah. We've come close. There's been a
Yeah,
few that have just gotten one other nomination, like The Post, and
It's always for
Selma.
acting. Or
Yeah. But
that
yeah,
one is
Extremely Loud and
truly-
Incredibly Close, The Blind Side. Yeah. I'm really hoping we get one in this era, now that we've actually expanded to a solid 10 moving forward. I'm hoping we get one of those little one-off nominations in Best Picture. That'd be really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember some people thought it could happen for like Wonder Woman.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. Or Crazy Rich Asians.
I think
Yeah.
the thing is, like, it's, because there's more categories now, and because there's a solid 5 in each other category, it's a lot harder for that to happen.
Yeah,
because,
exactly.
And I think that a lot of those movies that we mentioned that got just 2 nominations were probably close in other categories. Which I'm sure that a lot of the movies that from this year that we're talking about were also close.
Right. This is from Mark Lamb. Which horny chevalier do you prefer? 1 Hour with You or The Smiling Lieutenant?
I guess I like The Smiling Lieutenant a little better.
Me too.
Yeah.
I just think that's more of a fun movie, and it has the Claudette Colbert, Miriam Hopkins stuff. So
yeah.
Ronaldo Sosa basically asked somewhat of a same question. If you were to nominate Maurice Chevalier for Best Actor, would it be for 1 Hour with You or The Smiling Lieutenant? I feel like the same answer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, couldn't go wrong with either one.
Yeah.
All right. Let us get to our final Best Picture nominee, which is one that probably a lot of people have seen from this lineup compared to others. Shanghai Express. All right. Marlene Dietrich. Period. Truly, this is one of those examples of someone being photographed so impossibly gorgeously on film that it's almost breathtaking.
Yeah. This is my favorite movie of this lineup.
There we go.
And I watch it over and over again because of the photography and because of Marlene Dietrich. Von Sternberg, you could tell how much he loved this woman as a cinematic muse because he has Lee Garnes photograph her in the most amazing ways. She's so sexy and dangerous in this movie. It's so funny thinking about what people probably thought Bad Girl was. They probably thought it was like Marlene Dietrich as Shanghai Lily.
Right.
But it never, the movie doesn't moralize. It doesn't, it doesn't try to punish her for what it sees as her deviant behavior. In a lot of ways, it kind of is excited about how bad this woman is, and I think that makes it feel a lot more contemporary today than some of the other films of this lineup, and certainly other films of this period.
Yeah, I agree. And the film itself is very complex and layered, considering it's only like 80 minutes. To get into more of a summary of the film, for those who don't really know what we're talking about, basically she is playing a woman living in China, and it is very heavily suggested that she is some type of courtesan, and she's traveling by train to Shanghai where she's reuniting with a past lover. And meanwhile, there's this civil war happening in China, and the train is overthrown at one point by this rebel leader. There's a lot going on. Also, Anna May Wong is here as Marlene Dietrich's friend, and she's very bewitching. I do think that the film tries to tackle a lot of material in a very short window of time, and some characters can get short shrift because of that, but stylistically one of the most stunning films that I've watched from this era, and very deservedly won the Oscar for Best Cinematography, if only for that shot of Marlena like looking upward and lit from below that some people might not even know even that it's from this film, but is such an enduring image.
Von Sternberg's use of light and shadow in this movie is truly breathtaking. And, again, he was one of those guys who came up, not just in the silent era, but he came up in the era of German Expressionism. And you really see that in not just this movie, but all of the movies that he made at Paramount with Marlene Dietrich, including The Scarlet Empress, which is a masterpiece, Morocco, The Devil is a Woman. I mean, they really were an incredible team. Von Sternberg is such an interesting director. He was a camp filmmaker before anybody even knew what that term meant. But you see in the way that he explores sexuality and the way that he explores outsiders and people like Dietrich and Anna May Wong in this movie who are outcast women because of, their behaviors that are deemed to be, too salacious for the times. Like you can see the influence that he had on people like Douglas Sirk, Pedro Almodovar.
Oh yeah.
John Waters probably.
Yeah.
Like he really saw cinema as a medium to be expressionistic, and he's not dealing in reality in the same ways that other filmmakers at the time are. It's very, you can see it in the photography, in the production design, in the acting. In a lot of cases, there is a tilt towards the theatrical and the stylish that is very much it's startling to watch, really. I love this movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally co-sign, and I do see his influence in a lot of those directors that you listed off there, who are some of my favorite directors, and it's important for people to know that history, and that it didn't just start with Douglas Sirk or Todd Haynes, I guess you could say at this point too, or Pedro Almodovar. So, wow, okay, so we got a lot of questions for this. Naturally, I suppose. Jackson DeStefano, how glamorous is Marlene Dietrich?
Too glamorous.
That's the end of the question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just like impossibly otherworldly beauty glamorous. It's insane.
And just sexy as hell, I mean, really.
And owns it.
Exactly.
Yep. Mark Lamb said, is Shanghai Express the peak of von Sternberg and Dietrich? That's one question. We can answer that now. What do you think?
I would say The Scarlet Empress is their greatest film, for me personally. But this is certainly close. And Morocco as well is really great.
I will be watching Morocco shortly once we talk about that for the next episode.
Well, do see The Scarlet Empress as well, because that really is out there.
Yeah, so I hear. All right. His other question was, is Anna May Wong all that Ryan Murphy's Hollywood says she is?
Yes. I mean, I think it's funny because she and Dietrich were one and the same, really, because they both had their greatest achievements in foreign countries, and in countries that were not their home countries. Anna May Wong was born in California and had a really hard time getting roles because people wanted her to be less American, right? And she found her greatest success when she went to Europe and didn't have to deal with American racism. Whereas Marlene Dietrich, she was born in Germany, right? And I'm going to double check that to make sure. Yes, Germany. Yeah. She was born in Germany and then immigrated to America and became a huge star here. And it's interesting to see the two of them in this movie because they are, because of those experiences abroad for both of them, they are so sure of themselves in their sexuality and in their screen personas.
Yeah.
And it's captivating to watch.
Absolutely. And every time I even think about what happened with The Good Earth, I just get very upset because she would have been so perfect for that particular role, which is a movie I don't even like very much. Some of which has to do with Louise Reiner, but still.
Would have been vastly improved as a movie just for having a Chinese person play the role of Chinese woman.
And just the way that all happened with the fact that, you know, the miscegenation of the time, and the fact that they couldn't cast like a Chinese man next to her and not have that problem is just disgusting. But
Yeah, and it was what held her back from being a contemporary leading lady in Hollywood, was because she could not be cast opposite a white man, not even just in
right.
The Good Earth, but in any movie.
Yeah.
It's it's a really sad statement on our times. She deserved a much better career, because
Yep.
she's wonderful in this movie.
Yeah. And I had very mixed feelings on Ryan Murphy's Hollywood to get into that aspect of it. But if it did help to reignite some type of discussion about Anime Wong, then I think that that's one of the positives from that miniseries.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, that people know who she is now.
Yeah. Well, you're going to hate this question, so I'm excited to read it. This is such a loaded question. Okay. From Catherine Short. Shanghai Express promises to be an enjoyable Noah's Ark picture, but then it gets bogged down in too many artfully lit shots of Marlene Dietrich's face. Why is Joseph von Sternberg so highly regarded as a director when so many of his films seem terribly dull?
Well, yeah, I disagree with that. Well, I mean, again, it's like, I think what made von Sternberg's movies more compelling to watch than some other films of this time was that they were more visually stylish. This is a visual storytelling medium, and so many filmmakers in the early sound period got bogged down in shooting dialogue. And, you know, I like that von Sternberg is more focused on conveying not even just a story, but just like basic human emotions of lust and desire and fear, you know, and anger and all these passions coming up. You know, that he's more concerned with conveying those through camera work and through Marlene Dietrich's face than he is with. I mean, if this movie had just been about like the story, we would not be talking about it today.
Probably not. Yeah.
I mean, the script is, you know, it's what it is, right? Kind of clunky, but it's made with such visual daring and style that you're not paying attention to that. You're just enraptured by the images of it and by Dietrich's smoldering sensuality. And like I mean, you know, we listed off a ton of filmmakers like Todd Haynes and Almodovar and Douglas Sirk, you know, who were very obviously influenced by that, and you know, they would work within the same kind of parameters. You know, just like telling your stories through extreme visuals as opposed to just a reliance upon plot. You know,
I mean, this is not quite in that vein, but I would even throw in James Cameron specifically to make a point to say that like all of these directors we've talked about have detractors to them who feel that it is just style over substance, and that they get too bogged down in the visuals and the style and trying to do something with technology or doing fancy camera work and all this stuff. And that this probably is why, for example, Catherine Short is saying that some of these films are so terribly dull, is that doesn't always work for people, you know?
Yeah. It's a divisive kind of filmmaking, to be sure. And, you know, I understand, Catherine, why you might not respond to it as well. Because, I mean, like you said, people have the same kind of complaints about Todd Haynes or Almodovar or any of those people, you know.
Yeah.
But for me, that is what makes film the great art form of the 20th and the 21st century, is that it is the greatest storytelling medium for the visual image that we have.
Right.
You know, and the images stick with you more than the plots of movies.
Thank
and
you.
those directors
Absolutely.
really understand that.
Yeah. Very good. All right. Let's move on to Glenda Miss Jackson If You Nasty. Why was Marlene Dietrich looked over this year after being nominated the year before for Morocco? Do you think she was undervalued at the time?
I mean, I think she was probably close. I think
Again, 3 slots.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're looking at Marie Dressler had just won the year before, and
Hmm.
was the big, the top box office draw in Hollywood at that moment. It seems so weird to say that about her and Wallace
Yeah.
Beery, like they were both the number
Yeah.
one stars in America at that
Hmm.
point. I mean, I mean, you had also Helen Hayes and Lynn Fontaine, these two stage actresses who everyone really respected coming to movies, and I think it was just. Um, she was just probably shy of it, I think. Should have
Yeah.
won this year, honestly. But,
I would have. Yeah, I think I agree, even though I do really like Helen Hayes in the cinema model in Claudette.
oh,
But
sure. Yeah, yeah.
uh, yeah, for such an iconic performance of Shanghai Express, I think that would have been a perfect win for Marlena. I do think part of her being undervalued is just her beauty,
Yes.
and that she might not have been taken as seriously as an actress. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Ronaldo Sosa, if there were supporting categories, do you think Anna May Wong would have gotten a nomination?
I'd hope so, yeah. I don't know if she would have, um, just because of how Hollywood was at that time. Um, but I, you know, uh, it's not outside the realm of possibility. I
Yeah,
could see it happening.
I would lean towards no, to be
Yeah,
honest, just because of Hollywood racism, for one. And
yeah.
second, just the role. I don't know if it has that classic type of like, we have to give that an Oscar nomination type of thing, even though she's very, like I said, just very captivating in the film. I don't know if she even has enough screen time to really have, like, to register enough for people.
I mean, I think that the reason why her performance holds up so well for us right now is that it's more rooted in gesture and
Yep.
subtlety
Hmm.
than some other performances of this time. Um, yeah, I mean, I would probably say no, but I think if they did, just looking at some of the movies that are in contention this year, if they did have supporting categories, you know, I don't know if she would uh, make it in over, like, say, Joan Crawford for,
Right.
yeah, or the lady from Five Star Finale, Frances Starr. Yeah, but she'd make my ballot.
Or Minna Gombel from Bad Girl.
Yes, yes, her too. Yeah.
Yes. All right. I think we're good on. Yeah, we're good on those questions. So let's move on to our should have been a contender segment. These are other films that we feel maybe should have been in the Best Picture conversation but didn't quite get there. So, Zach, what's at the top of your list?
Well, this is always so confusing to do because of the eligibility period. Um,
Yes. So I sent
Thank you.
you a document of all of the eligible films.
That was very helpful.
Yes.
So there's two genres of film that were really coming into their own in this period of 1931 to 1932, and uh, there's two great examples of films that should have been nominated in multiple categories but were completely skunked. Um, you have the horror film, which Universal had started perfecting with Dracula, and then Frankenstein, which would have been eligible this year. And then you had the gangster film, which Warner's had started off with Public Enemy and Little Caesar, and Howard Hawks perfected over at Universal with Scarface. Those are both really striking, masterful films that have stood the test of time. And because the Academy, even back then, has a genre bias, received zero Oscar nominations.
Yes. Hard to argue with those. Um, I would also like to say, while we're talking about some horror, to go to a Paramount film that did resonate with Oscars at least was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which I really enjoy.
I do
So
too.
this one of our best actor winners, the other one, Frederick March, playing both Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Classic story that, people know this story already, so I don't need to go into it, but super pre-code, in that he meets a woman who very much propositions him for sex, and later he is violent towards her. And it's a lot more out there and direct than you would see after the enforcement of the code, I think. And I love that Frederick March won for this, because we very rarely see actors winning for sci-fi horror. I mean, I guess you could say we sort of returned to that a little bit this past year with Joaquin Phoenix, maybe. But yeah, Frederick March totally goes for it. I mean, obviously, the nature of being two characters allows him to really show off his range, and he is very menacing as Mr. Hyde. There's something about horror films like this that were made before the enforcement of the code that are just really unsettling, because they have more freedom. So just the way, like, we see him manhandling multiple women is quite disturbing.
It's a really good movie, and Frederick March is brilliant in it. Was not the first choice by the studio to play this part, because he was just known as a comedy actor back then. I mean, I think what makes this movie hold up, and also Frankenstein and Dracula as well, is that, again, I mean, they're very much based in visual storytelling and very much influenced by German expressionism, things like Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, where it's all about light and shadow and menace. I think that, that's what makes, even though like they might not be scary by modern standards, they're still unsettling, and very effective.
Yeah. And I mean, it gets the Best Actor win, it gets a Screenplay nomination, and it gets a Cinematography nomination, but not Best Picture, which isn't ultimately surprising considering the genre bias that the Academy continues to have. But just one of those things that doesn't quite add up when you have half of the Best Picture lineup being the only nomination for their film. Meanwhile, you have this other film that's winning an acting award, getting nominated for screenplay, having a tech nomination, and yet not quite Best Picture material, apparently.
Very odd. Very odd.
Yeah.
It did not get nominated. Not surprising given the genre bias. But at least it got something, whereas, Frankenstein was completely shut out. Right. Even though it is, remembered today as a masterpiece.
Right.
Very different kind of film too from Jekyll, because I think there's more empathy engendered towards the monster. I mean, Guillermo del Toro has talked a lot about the influence of this movie on him, and you can certainly see it in The Shape of Water, where the monster is more sad than scary.
Yes.
But that movie's a masterpiece.
I was going to say we got a few questions before we move on. Just about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde here. Okay. Ronald Sosa said, where was the honorary Oscar for the makeup artists of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde?
I guess they didn't think about it back then. Should have been one. Yeah. Should have had a makeup category.
Mm-hmm. It took a very long time to actually get one.
Yeah.
I think it was after The Elephant Man was snubbed that they finally were like, maybe we should honor this.
Yeah, American Werewolf in London was the first that one. That was 81, so a full 50 years after this.
Yeah. Jackson DeStefano, as we are now at Frederick March's first win, what do you think of the actor's body of work? Any favorite films or performances?
I like Frederick March. I like him in The Best Years of Our Lives, which he won for again. I like him in Inherit the Wind and 7 Days in May. I like him in The Iceman Cometh, which was his last movie. Frederick March is a good actor.
Yeah, also, all those things I agree. A Star is Born, I think he's really good in. And very brief, he doesn't have a lot to do, but we did talk about The Barris of Wimpole Street. He's very charming in that. And Les Miserables. I mean, he really had a flourishing career at this time period, and you can see why, because he has the charisma, and he's able to mold himself into many different types of parts at the same time, which is a very high value thing you can be as an actor in Hollywood, I think. So, he's not just the stereotypical just leading man who doesn't really have range to do other things. So,
yeah, I'm a fan.
Yeah. Steve K said, in relation to Wallace Beery winning the Oscar, plus Frederick March, can you imagine what Alfred Lunt thought when they announced the tie for Best Actor?
Was he even there?
I don't think he was, but
yeah, probably thought.
I can imagine being like, oh, okay, I guess I'm last officially.
It reminds me of when at the Critics' Choice Awards they tied Daniel Day-Lewis and Jack Nicholson for Best Actor. It was Day-Lewis for Gangs of New York and Nicholson for About Schmidt, and they only had 3 nominees. So the odd man out was Robin Williams for 1 Hour Photo, and Jack had Robin come up and give his acceptance speech, which is one of the funniest things I've ever seen in an awards show.
All right. I just want to get to our other acting winner, which is The Sin of Madeleine Claudette. Would not say that this is one that deserved more nominations necessarily, but I just wanted to discuss it because Helen Hayes is our Best Actress winner, and this is the kind of archetype that we would see over and over again with the Oscars. Actually, it's kind of 2 stereotypes. One is just the hooker with a heart of gold, Yeah. The other is just this mother who would do anything to protect her kid, which includes basically distancing herself from him and protecting him from the truth in order to just see him succeed. And that's basically what the film is about, where Helen Hayes is playing a woman who kind of gets the short end of the stick in life and winds up in prison, and all of her friends are taking care of her son, and eventually she becomes a prostitute to try to support him. It's a very, very soapy plot, but I think she has such a perfect face for this era of Hollywood, where just the glamour shots just suit her so well. And we talked about this last time with A Farewell to Arms. She just communicates so much, so many different emotions just with a look on her face and the way she reacts to something. And she has the theatrical background as the first lady of theater, but I think she is very well suited for film as well. Yeah,
I would agree. Yeah, I mean, I think the movie itself is pretty ridiculous, but she is very good in it. Of the people that were nominated, I think she was certainly the best of them. And I have no problem with this win for her.
Mm-hmm. Do you have more films to talk about?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I do want to say I had mentioned Scarface. And that is a really striking movie. And, even at the time, I think a lot of people were shocked that Howard Hawks was not nominated for directing. Paul Muni was not nominated for Best Actor. It's a movie that holds up really well today. I wanted to also mention Freaks by Todd Browning, his follow-up to Dracula, which pretty much ended his career. Not surprising to me this was not nominated. Still, it's developed quite a cult following in the years since, and it's a really fascinating movie. Not least of all, not just because of the stunt casting in it, but I mean, it's really unsettling to watch.
It is. I wanted to stop down on that one because I actually watched that way back when I was in film studies class in high school.
Yeah.
And it was so memorable to me that I've really never forgotten my experience of watching it. About a group of carnival performers and then this trapeze artist who tries to marry one of the members of the troupe, and things just go very wrong. Not received well at the time. Barely made a dent at the box office, but its reputation has just totally increased in all these decades later because, it's a film that cast real life performers. So, conjoined twins, people with dwarfism, all represented here. And what makes it worth watching is that it's very sympathetic to these characters who we usually
Yeah.
just see really kind of dehumanized or laughed at or just not seen at all, you know?
For all of the for all of the hay that was made about casting these circus performers, like it does not it treats them as people, which they are. You know,
Yeah.
it does not treat them as freaks, despite that being the title of the movie. The people who are the freaks in the film are the quote unquote normal people who look down on
Yeah.
them.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what really makes this movie more than just a stunt. It's what makes it, I think, a great movie, is that there is a real empathy engendered for the performers in the film.
Yeah, absolutely worth seeking this one out. I just also wanted to mention What Price Hollywood,
Mm-hmm.
just to highlight that this is the first kind of proper version of the story of A Star is Born. And this had a lot of influence on the 37 version, even to the point of kind of having a variation of that line that, like, I just wanted to take another look at you. Like, there's kind of a similar line in What Price Hollywood. But I think this is fine. I don't think
Yeah,
that it's like a great movie by any means. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it other than to see where this story that has spanned generations at this point really came from. Constance Bennett in the lead role, and Lowell Sherman. They're both decent, not really awards-worthy, but it's a solid film.
yeah. This was the other George Cukor film from this year, and
Yes.
he definitely made a better version of this with Judy Garland and James Mason. But yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, it's fine. It suffers, I think, from like what we're saying, just this kind of early sound picture lack of style and theatricality.
Yeah.
Two films released this year, well, in separate years, but in this eligibility period, by
Yeah.
Dorothy Arzner. One was Merrily We Go to Hell, and the other was Working Girls. Dorothy Arzner was, at that time, the only woman directing films at a major Hollywood studio. And her work was pretty much forgotten about after she retired in the early 1940s. But thankfully, it's coming back and being reapprised and reappreciated. And she was a director who had a really great sense of style and would oftentimes put in very weird, very sexual imagery in her films. And I think that both of these movies are worth another watch. And I'm glad that they were on the Criterion Channel for a while, as well as a lot of her other films. And I think that her work is worth being looked at again, not just because of the significance of her role in Hollywood, but because she was a really good director who deserves to be talked about more.
Yes, I need to dig into her work.
There was also two René Clair films that were made, the great French director. One was Les Millions, which was a comedy about a missing lottery ticket, and the other is A Nous la Liberté, which got an art direction nomination this year. That's a French slice of life drama that's really good and worth looking at. Another Howard Hawks movie from this year, The Crowd Roars, which is a racing drama with James Cagney. It's kind of stilted and dated in a lot of ways, but the racing sequences have a lot of energy, and Cagney's really good. So I think that's worth checking out. This was also, and I'm not necessarily saying they should have gotten Oscar nominations, but I think they're worth mentioning. Platinum Blonde, an early Frank Capra comedy about a reporter who marries a wealthy blonde bombshell named played by Jean Harlow. It's really fun, and Jean Harlow is great in it. Monkey Business, the Marx Brothers comedy where they're on the ocean liner, and that's really funny. Possessed with Joan Crawford, not the one that she got nominated for in the 40s, but a completely different movie of the same title. Pardon Us with Laurel and Hardy, who won a short form. This was also the year that the short film categories were created, we should say.
Yes, that's right.
Laurel and Hardy comedy, won the very first one, but this was a feature that they made where they're both sent to jail for running booze in Prohibition days. Waterloo Bridge, the James Whale World War One drama that was a pre-code adaptation of this famous play that was later turned into a movie with Vivian Leigh in 1940. This was also the first Tarzan movie with Johnny Weissmuller, Tarzan the Ape Man, directed by W.S. Van Dyke, the guy who made The Thin Man. This was also the year that Cecil B. DeMille made his third remake of The Squaw Man, a Western that he had previously done twice in the silent era. This was also an early William Wyler movie, A House Divided, which I've never seen. I don't think it's available anywhere. But this was an early film that he made with Walter Houston, which, of course, they'd later have great Oscar success with Dodsworth. Street Scene from King Vidor, which is a slice-of-life drama set in Hell's Kitchen, which is pretty interesting. And Sidewalks of New York, which was Buster Keaton's early forays into sound filmmaking, and not nearly as successful as his silent comedies, excuse me.
Wow. That was an extensive list. You always put me to shame whenever you're on, just with how much you've seen.
Oh, well,
but it's good though.
Thank you.
And I will just mention at the end here, because it is somewhat significant, that Walt Disney is one of our Oscar winners of this year. He wins an honorary award for the creation of Mickey Mouse.
Yes, the first of 500 that he won in his career.
I think 22, but close.
Yes.
Yeah, most of them are shorts, his short cartoons. But yeah, they acknowledged history that would continue forward into the 21st century. The legacy of Mickey Mouse. Unmatched.
Yeah, truly.
Yes. So that's all I have on this particular Oscar year. Do you have anything else you'd like to mention?
That'll do it, I think.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, when we come back, we will be delivering our verdict as to whether we think Grand Hotel deserved Best Picture or if Bad Girl deserved it more.
I was ambitious then. We were drilled like little soldiers. No rest, no stopping. I was little, slim, but hard as a diamond. Then I became famous and... But why am I telling you all this? Last night I didn't know you at all.
I am Felix Benvenuto Freiherr von Geigen. My mother called me Flix.
No, Flix. Oh, that's sweet. And how do you live? And what kind of a person are you?
I'm a prodigal son, the black sheep of a white flock. I shall die on the gallows.
You know, you're entirely different from what I expected.
Different? How?
Oh, I don't know. I thought you were more of a coquette, not so ladylike.
What did you expect?
Wouldn't you like to call me by the first name?
Well, I don't know what he wants. I never saw him before.
I know you. I've kept your books for you, and I know all about you. If one of your employees was half as stupid in a small way as you are in a big one... What are you
And we're back. So now we'll be delivering our verdict as to whether we think Grand Hotel deserved Best Picture or if Bad Girl should have taken it. Zach Laws, what is your verdict?
Between those two movies, I would say Grand Hotel. I think it holds up a little better.
Yes. I definitely agree. I don't know if I would say that it would be my winner of the 8 films here.
No.
But, you know, between the two, I think this is a much better, satisfying emotional experience and a film that I guess, treats its subject matter in a way that's not having me constantly thinking throughout the movie, like, just like feeling frustrated, basically. And so I will definitely give it to Grand Hotel, and I do think that the art direction is just second to none. Would I give it to another film in the lineup? Maybe. I mean, I think 5-star Final or Shanghai Express would have been great winners, but it makes sense that they went with what they went with, and I don't begrudge them.
Yeah, Shanghai Express would be my personal pick. For picture, director, certainly should have been nominated for actress. I think Grand Hotel, in just between that and Bad Girl, is a lot better at doing what it sets out to do than Bad Girl is.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Zach, for joining me once again, and I'm glad that I could get you on one last episode of this edition of this podcast. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure talking about this stuff with you.
Yeah. And where can people find more of you on the internet?
Well, you can find me on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram at Zach Laws. That's ZACHLAWS. And you can find all of my work at Gold Derby.
And you can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. The show is at Oscar Runner Up. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want to hear even more Oscar talk, you can go on over to patreon.com/andtherunnerup and become a patron and listen to a whole bunch of bonus episodes and quite a few with Zach Laws here. So with that, thank you again, Zach.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
And I will bid you all adieu.